Riders on the storm. I should have left when the first one vanished. I should have packed up, gassed up the truck, and driven out Black Hollow without a second thought. But you don't just leave a town like this. Black Hollow isn't a place you move to, it's a place you're born into, a place you belong to. The kind of town where everyone knows each other, where the old folks pass down stories like their family heirlooms, and where the ocean has more say in your fate than the law ever will. Maybe that's why we stayed. Maybe that's why we didn't run when the storm came. But we should have. It started with Daniel Hodge. A fisherman, built like a dock post, face carved by years of salt and wind. The kind of man who had a story for everything, most of them lies, but good ones. He'd been out at sea when the storm rolled in, trying to beat the waves back to shore. He never made it. No distress call. No wreckage. Just gone. People said the sea took him. That's what it does, after all. It gives, it takes, and it never says why. But old man Tucker swore up and down that he saw Daniel that night. Said he was standing by the roadside in the pouring rain, just standing there, soaking wet, staring into nothing. Tucker only looked away for a second, but when he turned back, Daniel was gone. The next morning, the town felt off. Not just the usual kind of eerie that comes after a bad storm. This was different. The air had a thickness to it, like you were breathing in something more than just oxygen. The streets were still wet, not normal wet, but wrong wet, like the rain had left behind something that refused to dry. The puddles weren't clear but dark, thick like ink, stretching slick and slow through the gutters. And the birds were gone. No morning calls, no wings fluttering overhead. Just silence, like the whole town was holding its breath. Then Lydia Crane, the lighthouse keeper, disappeared. She lived up by the cliffs, tending to the old tower that had been there longer than any of us. She barely ever left, and yet, the next morning, her house was empty. The lighthouse, still standing, but silent. The beacon was off, though no one had turned it off. And then Marco, the kid who delivered groceries, vanished on his way home. By the time the sun set, the town was drowning in whispers. People said they had seen figures standing by the roadside during the storm, pale faces, hollow eyes, bodies frozen in the rain. Some swore they saw Daniel among them. Others saw Lydia. The missing weren't just missing. They were taken. I should have left. But I didn't. Sheriff Holden was the first to see the riders. He had been driving down Hollow Road late that night, searching for Marco, when his headlights caught something moving in the storm. At first, he thought they were men on horseback, but the longer he looked, the less human they seemed. Their shapes flickered like candlelight in the wind, their faces shifting like the rain itself couldn't decide what they were. Their eyes, God, their eyes, burned like dying embers in a drowned fire. But it wasn't just them. The missing were with them, trailing behind the riders like puppets on invisible strings. Daniel. Lydia. Marco. Others, dozens, maybe more. All of them soaked to the bone, their bodies stiff, faces blank, moving in eerie unison. Holden slammed the brakes. His hands shook as he reached for his radio. But when he looked up again, they were gone. The next day, he went to the elders, the ones who had lived in Black Hollow long enough to remember the things the rest of us had forgotten. They told us about the curse. Centuries ago, during a storm much like this one, a group of sailors had come ashore, pirates, criminals, men who took what they wanted. They raided, burned, and killed without mercy. But the town fought back. They slaughtered the men and sent their bodies back to the sea. Only, the sea never let them go. Every few decades, when the storm came, so did the riders, the spirits of the drowned, cursed to roam the land, searching for souls to drag back into the storm. They didn't just kill. That would be too kind. They took everything, the will, the spirit, the very essence of a person, until there was nothing left but a hollow shell. And now, they were here again. By the third night, Black Hollow was barely holding on. People barricaded their doors, lit candles, whispered prayers. But the rain wasn't just rain anymore. It was alive. It slithered down walls, pulled in doorways, seeped under locked doors. And the wind carried whispers, soft, familiar voices calling from the storm. By then, there were only a handful of us left. We gathered at the lighthouse, the highest point in town, the last safe place. There were maybe a dozen of us, huddled together, clutching lanterns and torches like lifelines. The legend said the riders feared fire, that light could keep them at bay. So we waited. The wind howled. The rain turned thick as tar. And then, we saw them. They came through the storm, their shapes barely more than shadows, moving in perfect silence. The missing walked behind them, faces blank, empty, lost. Holden raised his torch high. The flame flickered, then died. The riders didn't stop. They didn't slow. They came like the storm itself, and the last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed us was their empty, burning eyes. No one ever found Black Hollow after that night. Not the roads, not the buildings, not the people. It was like we had never been there at all. Just an empty coastline, where the wind whispered, and the sea roared. And when the next storm came, the riders rode again.